Okay, here we are. Kinesiology 230, chapter 12. Still talking flexibility. This is presentation number 5. This is the last one in the series. And the book goes into warm up towards the end of this chapter. Um, you need to have a warm up. It has a number of different benefits. It raises total body temperature, raises the temperature of the muscles, uh, increases the pliability and the flexibility. And I want to just pull this to the side. Pliability is the ability of a muscle to stay soft and responsive, allowing for better force absorption and adaptation. Or flexibility is a muscle to lengthen, to influence the range of motion. So notice the difference there between those two. It's easy to think like my muscles are pliable and flexible and interchange those, but there's actually a little nuance between those. And the warm-up itself can be very specific to the activity, like we saw the running technique drills, the ABC stuff that we saw in the previous example, or it could be a more generalized warm-up, like walking laps on a track to warm the core body temperature, and then go in and do a more generalized, more specific warm-up for an activity. And what they talk about in the book is this. They mention that most research indicates that it's great to do it because it's related to these things that are temperature-dependent physiological responses that increase the tissue temperature and blah, 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 blah. And then when you go into this a little bit deeper, they start to elaborate on this and they go into a little bit further. They talk about it's the actual friction that you have, right? The increase in temperature of the tissue occurs because of the result of friction of the sliding filaments during muscle action. But we always talk about the Z's going to the M's and the sliding filament theory. The byproduct of that is it takes ATP, and when we break one of the bonds and go from an ATP to an ADP, we know one of the things that happens is we create heat because you have a release of energy in that process. And I'll let you just kind of take a moment to try to remember what happens if we have a release of energy versus a creation of an energy. So when we go from ADP to ATP, it's a different process versus ATP to ADP. Oof, that's a lot. So I'll let you take a moment to try to remember that from last week. All right. As we do this, we have increase of blood flow to muscles, increase of the receptors. We talk about kind of priming the system. We talk about potentiation. Those are things we talk about when we're working with athletes and clients. And you have this disassociation of oxygen from the hemoglobin and the myoglobin. The hemoglobin carries those 4 oxygen molecules, best case scenario, and they have a greater affinity depending upon the blood pH levels. And then you have the increase in speed, increase in the speed of nerve impulse transmission. So you have a number of different things that happen here when we start to do a warm-up, and they're all to the benefit of being able to perform better, and they're all performance related. So with a passive type of warm-up, you have hot showers. You can go take a nice warm shower if you've been outside all day. Warm up your core body temperature. You can use a hydroculator and go over to the hydroculator and go get a heating pad out, or use just a regular electric heating pad. Massage, because of the friction component, will also create heat and warm up the muscles. A more generalized warm-up would be just stuff like jumping rope, maybe riding an attack bike, going for a light jog. But you're looking for things that increase the heart rate, increase blood flow. You're increasing the deep muscle temperature, but also the respiration rate, etc. And that allows you to kind of prime the pump a little bit. And now just think back to a couple presentations when we were talking about oxygen debt and oxygen deficit and how we're trying to ramp ourselves up to a steady state exercise. There's a process there, and it takes a little bit of time to be able to have our bodies adapt and be able to get to that steady state exercise and apply enough ATP to where we have enough energy to have muscle contraction. But also remember that when we're in steady state 15 minutes, as per that one chart, versus the other one that was a sprint, you have an oxygen deficit that you have to overcome. And so the warm-up actually helps with elongating a process that allows people to be able to have a more functional workout because they've gone through the process of ramping up towards that steady state exercise. So specific warm-ups include movements that could be part of the activity, like a slow jog to a run, a running technique warm-up to sprinting, doing an attack bike to a cycle class, And it serves as a bit of a mental rehearsal for what they're going to do for the actual event itself, of the workout. And it allows for some complexity, right, to be performed before the actual activity. So you can introduce different skills into the equation before you're actually asking your athletes or your client to do something very specific. You can integrate that into the warm-up process. The book also lists different types of warm-up. Ramp is one of them: raise, activate, mobilize, potentiation. And those three main phases, they definitely have their place in terms of raising body temperature, activate and mobilize the muscle itself, and have greater potentiation in the nervous system. And these are great little takeaways in terms of what to do with your client. And hopefully you remember the difference between catabolic and anabolic. All right, guys, have a good one. Signing off.